You're watching ASOTUCon 2024, presented in collaboration with Reynolds and Gubagoo.
Thanks to our studio partner, FullThrottle.ai, and our panel partner, Dealeron, for making this panel happen.
We have an intimate group here. This is going to make for some delightful conversation. I'm Michael Cirillo, Chief of Staff at ASOTU. We're excited that you're here, especially for this conversation, because what I would submit to you is that this is often what the champions circle looks like. Fewer in numbers, while everyone's like, how do I get more leads? How do I figure out my life? We are the early adopters. We are the early adopters that are paying attention. You might have heard Brian Benstock. Were you here for Brian Benstock yesterday? One of the things he talked about is being 5 steps ahead. Being 5 steps ahead. And I would recommend that each of us here work on our gut laughs, because when we are 5 steps ahead and everyone just starts thinking about this, we're gonna have to pull it out. You know what a gut laugh is, like that thing. We're gonna have to work on that. Let me get us set up here. I'm gonna turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves, and then I'm gonna come back and introduce the subject matter, and then we're gonna get into it. This is a conversation at this point. Our panelists are selected. They are experts at what we're going to be talking about today. If we have time, are you comfortable with it? If you have questions about this topic, this is the time to be a participant in this conversation. Is that fair? Okay, cool. We would love to hear your voices as well. Let's start here. Sir, please introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you. I'm Rafael Riconosciuto. I'm located in Seattle. We have a global company called Termly, and we do consent solutions and privacy solutions for businesses that really address the bigger conversation here, which is protecting privacy from consumers. So we definitely help businesses try to make that as easy and affordable as possible.
Don't lie. How many of you thought, please say your last name again, because it sounded all sorts of sexy? Let's hear it.
Riconosciuto.
Dang, right? I'm like the Italian that got the lame last name, Cirillo. It's like, come on, I can't compete with that.
I don't know how I'm supposed to upstage that one. I'm Nathan Hollenbeck.
With the most American accent ever.
Yeah. I'm the Vice President of Marketing for the Del Grande Dealer Group in Northern California. We've got roughly 16 rooftops and brands that we represent.
Hello, I'm Tina Quatto, Director of Product at Dealeron. We do websites and digital advertising.
Cool. Well, we're so glad you guys are here with us. Thank you for being here and sharing your wisdom with us. Today we're talking about a very, very, very critical, mission-critical topic, protecting your business and your shoppers in a privacy-centric culture. I'm just going to kick this off by suggesting that what I love about the way this topic is positioned is often from a dealership or a retail in general perspective, we're thinking primarily about who? How do we protect ourselves, because we don't want that crazy lunatic taking all sorts of advantage of us. What I love about this is the dual perspective of yes, us, but also them. It's a much more open conversation. So we're going to start with you. As we're moving into a much more privacy conscious era, how do we make sure that yes, we're protected, but also that the customer knows, maybe just beyond a pop-up on a website, that they're also protected? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think relating it back to yourselves and how much you care about privacy is something that we need to transcend that into the business world and have that same passion. I think in the end, businesses need to realize that there is this inherent trust that consumers are looking for in websites and interactions. And I've seen so many different technologies that are being introduced to websites here and ways you interact with consumers. And so they're looking for that. And I think as long as you are transparent, as long as you're vocal about that and proud of protecting that information for consumers, then you build that trust, you build that security, not only from a liability side, but also from that trust and lead acquisition all the way through the sale of a vehicle. So I think that is the number one thing. Try to be openly transparent of how much you care about privacy, and that will definitely benefit on all fronts when it comes to that digital footprint.
this now goes well beyond privacy policies on websites, doesn't it? I mean, y'all rock it with the website game. And I know we've gone through eras leading up to this sort of a thing. I would say that the pump has been primed for a while, right? Every time you fill in a web form, it's like, we won't share your information ever. But I mean, from your vantage point powering gazillions, don't fact check me on the number of websites.
It's gazillions.
It's gazillions. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, how can we add to what Raphael's saying and let the customer know in a much more meaningful way? I mean, what are you guys working on that lets the customer know, yeah, you're protected?
Yeah, I mean, not to plug, but we've got a partnership with Termly that we just kicked off because we do believe in their solution. So we wanted to provide this to our dealer customers. And I know you brought up the pop-up, but I do think having that consent banner, that pop-up that shows like, hey, we do care about your privacy. And you can expand it. I'm sure most are not, but you can expand to see kind of the different scripts and how we are categorizing them and what we are actually tracking, just so you have that transparency. I think the transparency is really where the trust comes into play. And that's on the website. I think from a website business as a whole, we've made steps to incorporate direct API integrations to send leads. I think that's something that was, pushed by the GLBA compliance. And we took steps to do that because we wanted to protect our dealers. So, you can still send those, ADF emails, but you're not really in compliance doing that. So, taking steps on the back end too that, our dealers understand, but it's still protecting our shoppers.
I think the privacy conversation is in an interesting place too, because I feel like it's shifting. Like back in the day, it was Cambridge Analytica and, people's access to marketing information, and our people are marketing to me, I don't want them to market to me or whatever. But now you've got these massive data breaches that have happened. Like I myself, my social security number I found out is on the dark web because of AT&T's breach, right?
Oh, cool.
So, I've had to turn on all this stuff to make sure that people can't apply for credit in my name and things like that. And that's everyone's worst nightmare, right? So I'm like super paranoid about that myself. And we as dealers have access to very similar information, right? Like that's just a phone company that you pay $80 a month to, right? Whereas like people apply for large amounts of credit with us as dealers. And so I think it's not just, hey, what are you doing with my information from a marketing standpoint? It's how are you protecting my data from these bad actors and characters that are trying to get access to my information to do fraudful things.
Do you guys remember that I call him a tool because I'm Italian. I mean, I don't have a better word. That was like,
jabroni.
But he did like late night infomercials, and he's like, I'm so confident in my identity protection. Here's my social security number, and then he totally got obliterated. And everyone stole his identity. Like Domino's Pizza stole a guy's identity.
Yeah.
So that brings up an interesting point because it does it transcends further than just what we're thinking about sometimes, perhaps surface level. So from a dealer's perspective, what are the steps that you're taking to make sure that you're protected? Because that is a you protection type thing. That's where my mind goes. Because of your point of we're accepting so many people's confidential and secure information.
Yeah, we're California dealers. It's a very litigation-heavy state, but we also just in general believe that like it's never the right time to do the wrong thing, and if we're going to have control over this very sensitive data and information, that we need to take whatever steps that we can to protect that information, because it's the right thing to do for the consumer, but it's also more cost-effective than getting sued or a class action lawsuit from a data breach, right? So like any of the solutions that you do look at, if they seem expensive, they're not. They're actually quite cheap in comparison. So we invest a lot into technology. We have a data lake on the Microsoft Azure cloud that is protected by, we have multi-factor authentication that we use internally as a group to protect that information. We're very sensitive about who has access to what. So we also run all our CRMs for the dealerships are Salesforce, and so like in a lot of automotive CRMs, you can actually go as a product specialists, online product specialists, and export your lead data. Like, that's like a lot of fear that I hear from dealers is like, oh, we let someone go and then they took their leads with them and went to the next dealer. But there's just so much more worse things that can happen with that. So we restrict access to that to only like the 6 admins that we have within the organization within that tool. So we do a lot to protect it because it's the right thing to do, and it's obviously, going to be far more cost effective to be proactive with that than wait for something negative to happen to all our guests. And then what does that damage our reputation with, right? So, yeah.
Human nature is pretend that nothing's happening until it actually happens and they're not protected.
Yeah.
I mean, please.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of expand on that point too. We see this a lot where you mentioned data breaches, right? And it's like the Amazons, these big companies that get fined millions and millions of dollars, and that's kind of the perception that's out there. But really, with their GDPR regulation in Europe did a study with all the fines that they issued over the course of the past 2 years, and 75% of those fines were to small businesses. You do see these large ones that get all the media coverage, but at the end of the day, it's a real threat for these dealerships and individual small businesses that have to understand, educate themselves. And you guys went as far as even putting practices within your organization to understand privacy, which is even a next level step that we see from organizations. So it's important to understand that it is a real threat that all businesses need to really start considering, because it is becoming the norm. It's normal for somebody to have the option to get tracked. I mean, we all see this on iPhones now and Androids and everything too, right? Apps that you download, the first thing to ask you, is it okay to get tracked? And I think at the end of the day, we're expecting that option. And this is why you're seeing regulations, state after state, starting to adopt, and obviously going off the CCPA and other California regulations that started it, and even a federal law that's even being considered here too as well. So it is something that is going to be the normal, if not already.
Yeah, I was just going to go back to your point around education. I think that was something that I really wanted to bring up, is making sure that you at the dealership are educated around your specific state and federal regulations. I think it's about 30% of states have their own privacy regulations at this point, and only more are joining. So it's really specific to your dealership, your state, and you need to stay educated. I mean, from a website provider's perspective, we can only provide our guidance. We're not here to provide legal advice at all. We want to provide you tools and options to tools to help you stay in compliance and protect your privacy. But it's ultimately up to you at the dealership to educate yourself and those on the ground. So I think that's really great that you're in California, so you've kind of had to do this already. But were you working, do you have a privacy compliance, specialist at the dealership? Just curious how you got into that.
Yeah, so we've always taken it very serious from the get-go, and as it's evolved, we've had to bring other people in. But we have a chief strategy officer who's a licensed attorney in 2 different states that oversees strategy for the group and legal. He has a paralegal that works underneath him who is the person that handles. We use a tool called Comply Auto to manage the CCPA compliance of things. But we also use their Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act tool as well, which simulates cyber attacks to try and find vulnerabilities within our database and within our network. And then we work with our IT company to kind of patch that up. That's sort of one of the big things. They also simulate phishing attempts. And so we've had to whitelist their IP addresses to be able to send, because we have a lot of stuff to protect our teams from that. But it's unfortunate, like if you haven't done that with your team, it's like a very depressing thing to do, because you see how many people give up their login to CDK or all these other things that you don't want them to just give to cybersecurity people. But I think the first test that we did that went out to 1,000 team members had like 33 people that gave up their login information. And so then there's the education at the individual person level, like, you really shouldn't open these types of emails, and you really shouldn't, look at the URL it comes from, like microloft.com is not microsoft.com, and things like that.
Riddled with spelling errors.
People. So it was pretty horrifying when we went through that.
To piggyback off of this, is this Japanese? We brought up phishing. We're not talking about the nitty-gritty dirt band, just so we're all clear. Is there anything that we want to get clarification, because there's a lot of very valuable info here? Is this making sense Do we have anyone here that wants to learn more about anything that's been talked about so far? Don't lie. Or lie. It doesn't matter.
I have a question in Q&A.
Please.
Would you recommend, when it comes to consent, an opt-in or opt-out approach?
Hold on. This is the Donahue segment of the...
Would you recommend an opt-out or opt-in approach to consent management?
Who would like to
This
take
is
that?
specific to cookie banners, right?
Yeah, it is for consent banners. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, just to define it, opting, that's probably a good place to start. Opting in and opting out is something that's always kind of debated. The more conservative approach is to opt out of consent, meaning that, or opt out of being tracked. And so that means everything is not being tracked until you officially I'm sorry, I'm going to get this backwards. It's opting in to consent, sorry. And so that takes some work to make sure that it's set up correctly, but essentially what you're doing is saying that there's no tracking that's going to happen to the individual until someone actually opts in to being tracked. And that is a GDPR European standard. It's not so much in the United States and North America. North America is more of an opt-out, saying I'm going to be tracked until I officially opt out. And so the conservative approach and where things are going is definitely to have an opt-in approach, meaning that we are not tracking any consumers until they officially opt into being tracked. And then they can choose their preferences via the banner or consent. It just gives them more control. And this doesn't mean that the business itself is sacrificing functionality of the site or being able to convert leads or generate leads. What it means is that the technology behind it allows the consumer to not only give preferences, but at the same time leveraging the technologies to work with consent so that the respectfulness of opt-out or requirements from different laws are abided by. So, and that's the biggest misconception, I think, is that if we're ultra conservative, we're going to lose a ton of information. But there's so many different things from analytics on Google's side to everything else that is being worked on so that the marketing side of things doesn't get sacrificed as well. So, but yeah, hopefully that answers any questions.
Yeah, I mean, we've taken the stance of let them opt in, and I think part of that reason for me as the marketer, it does pain me to throw away this valuable marketing data, but at the same time, like from a logistics standpoint, it's so much harder to opt those cookies out of Facebook, of Google, of the Trade Desk, or anywhere else where you're pushing that data. So we've taken the stance of it's just easier to allow them to opt in and go from that route.
It definitely is, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's specific to your business too, but I think what I would encourage is to make sure that those scripts, when you're working with implementing a solution like Termly or Comply Auto, that those scripts are categorized appropriately so that they're not all just like unclassified, and that you're classifying them, if they are essential, if they're marketing, if, whatever the other categories that you get through your consent banner, so that you then know exactly, so that you're not losing marketing value or you're not losing insight when they're opting out of, unclassified or something to that effect. And I know that's pretty technical, but I think it's valuable to work again with your provider in order to classify those.
Yeah, and one thing I want to say is there's, we were in a previous session about the FTC, and there's clear guidelines of what you can't do and what you can do. And I think when it comes to privacy, it's more about just being transparent. It's okay to track somebody. It's not like you can't do that. It's just that you need to be transparent that you are. And so that's why consent, like you said, being transparent of what cookies, which are essentially tracking scripts for every certain type of software that you collect, is just being there so someone can opt out of that. It's okay to be tracking that person. You just got to give them that option. So I think there's a little bit, you definitely need privacy policies and things that are requirements, but those policies are really just stating exactly what you do and what you do as a business and when it comes to privacy and the practices that you have. So keep that in mind. There's definitely a transparency element, and you shouldn't approach it as, we can't do this or can't do this. It's really just about trying to put everything on the table and letting the consumer decide what they would like to opt into.
Where's the bottom of the barrel here? Where do you think we'll actually end up? Because I have just this, I've been studying civilizations and how we just always ruin everything, right? We just always do. What's the end game here? Do we get to a point where we are so privacy restricted that we don't get to know anything about anybody anymore, and we just have to somehow hope they show up at our store to buy something. Like, are we gonna get to a point where people are so offended to give us their name because of some like, Tina, you brought up earlier what, state regulations and just the fluctuation of things. What are your thoughts?
And it pains me to say this, but I think logins is probably where we're going to go, right? So that you feel safe on the website that you're on.
No.
I know. And I probably would have said something different in an earlier session. And, it'll probably take a few years for this to catch on to the dealership websites, but we're probably moving into a more login based system.
It's interesting you say that because we're actually already seeing that on the third-party marketplaces, right? Because they want to be able to authenticate this, audience and whatnot. So I think we inevitably want to do the same thing, but it is a lot to ask for someone to log into their dealership's website. I mean, we're trying to figure this out from a technology standpoint of how can we give value to the consumer to be able to do that, right? Like if we had a DGDG app where people could get an offer on their car at any point to give us their vehicle or trade it in. What are our service specials, appointment reminders, and things like that? Like they might be more inclined to log in with that on the website to see what cars are in their maybe online digital garage, the cars that they've saved that they're interested in replacing. It's like there needs to be some end benefit to the consumer, we believe, to get them into that state of
I'm having an epiphany moment now why everyone is trying to get us to download their apps. And we're talking like McDonald's wants you to download their app, and Buffalo Wild Wings wants you to download
and
their app.
ASOTU.
ASOTU wants you to download their app. Holy moly. One time just quick useless side note, one time I interviewed the inventor of two-factor authentication. If you'd like his address so we can go toilet paper his house, I will share that privately. I will share, no, I'm just kidding. Logins, do you think that's the end of it? Like, what are your thoughts as we're looking to the future? Maybe it's only 12 months away. Maybe it's 2 years away. The reason we're in this room is because we are all thinking about it. Where do we go? I mean, is there a world where apps become obsolete and we move on to the next thing? Is it all going to happen in the car? Is connectivity all going to happen that way? These are all the places my mind goes. I'm curious your pontifications about it. Also, Tina, I must say before you answer, Tina did say that we are not lawyers earlier, so just keep that in mind.
My legal team made me say that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, legal team.
I do wonder if there just needs to be maybe some more consumer education because they maybe don't understand it and they're terrified of it, and so that's why their idea is I want to protect my privacy. I want to opt out. I just don't even want to think about it or deal with it. I think if they just knew that all I'm trying to do is understand how they bought their car, they might not be as terrified of, it's okay for, yes, they spent a lot of money on advertising to get me to come into the dealership. Right. It's fine that they want to know that, or
which we do anyways, right? We've always asked people, how'd you hear about us? Or so that makes sense to me.
Yeah, or they just write drive-by, but yeah. Yeah.
Salesperson writes
exactly.
drive-by. Exactly. Thoughts? I see the wheels spinning here.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's so many variables that go into looking at it from a global scale. I see, privacy laws in Europe and around the world being more progressive towards protecting consumers. I think North America is more business oriented, so I think we're very behind in the extreme regulations. So I think, the mid to near future, I would say that we're probably seeing a federal law and probably all states adopting some sort of individual privacy law that's going to have some restrictions on businesses to take responsibility for collecting data. And then as things progress, I could see us moving towards more of a consumer-oriented approach, which is, like you said, like an opt-in where you can't be tracking. And then from a digital standpoint, you start seeing Google Analytics is a good example. They just pushed, cookie lists. That's kind of a term that I'm sure some of you guys have heard before, but new tracking technology is essentially what that is. Metrics that are in aggregate instead of specifics. So that's also something that you kind of start seeing shifting towards. So I think overall we're slowly but surely going to evolve to a place where consumers are educated and they have options to be able to find their data, access their data, manage their data with whatever platforms that may be. And how that looks like or what technologies are providing that, that is to be determined in the future.
Do you maybe see you kind of talked about like a bottom benchmark. Like, do you see the Fed coming in and stepping in and saying, this is federally what we accept as the minimum requirements, and then states taking the additional approach of, California obviously is going to play on the very conservative side, and there may be other states that are less.
You're asking him, right?
Yes. Yeah.
You do not want my comment on this.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I think that you're going to have like a baseline that everything falls under, and then from there you're going to have individual states still having their own privacy laws. California, CCPA, CPRA were both the regulations that were started at the forefront. They were essentially, the United States answer, or California's answer to GDPR, which was the major regulation in Europe. So in the end, yes, I agree that I think we'll have individual states. There's like 14 or some that just signed bills that are going to be active by October of next year. Obviously, more coming. So yeah, I think it'll be a mix of a baseline federal law and on top of individual state laws, as a baseline, and then the state laws above. California is the most conservative, and I think they're at the forefront of a lot of privacy regulations. Most state laws, I would say 90%, are just kind of following suit, and just, every lawyer's got their own different way of, writing a contract. So it's just different language, but essentially the basis of it is about the same. So we see that from a regulatory standpoint, and I think that would be the first step towards potentially the next level of regulation, like I mentioned before.
It really, I guess, goes full circle to the last word in the title of this panel, which is culture. When it becomes culture, it's because there's been such broad acceptance, hasn't there? I bet you didn't think that a conversation about privacy could go so quick, but here we are at the end of our panel. So just before we close, I want to turn it back over to each of you. How can those joining us here or watching after the fact connect with you?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, we are on the ASOTU app, and everything is in a vendor, or excuse me, as a presenter and attendee. So you can connect me with on LinkedIn, and termly.io is our platform, and a lot of education there. We're education forward, and I have plenty of resources to kind of understand different industries, states. We even have a very interactive state map that can kind of look up exactly where your privacy laws in each state. So it's a great place to start.
Thank you.
I've actually opted out of connection. No, I'm on LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. That's where I spend most of my time on social.
You thought ASOTU was for convicts. This is like an ex-con rehabilitation clinic. I gotcha.
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Let's hear it for our panelists. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Oh yes, shameless plug. We have flyers. Please take them. Your spring cleaning checklist for compliance.